Okay guys, welcome back. Let's do our last segment on membrane transport. I know you're probably excited to be done with this because we've been talking about transport processes for 2 or 3 clips. But let's do one more, and we're going to be talking about the active processes. We've already done the sodium-potassium pump, which is an active process through a pump, right, moving sodium and potassium. But now let's look at vesicular transport. Just another big hint here, right? On tests, I might say, which of the following is known as a passive process for membrane transport? I give you primary transport, exocytosis, endocytosis. We're about to go over those. And I give you osmosis as an example. You want to be able to pick osmosis as the passive process, right? If I give, say, which of the following would be a process that requires the expenditure of energy in the form of ATP maybe, and I put simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, filtration, and sodium-potassium pumps, something to do with primary transport example, well then you want to pick sodium-potassium pumps because that requires energy, right? It's an active process. So you want to be able to kind of know these in their categories, right? And be able to compare how they're similar or dissimilar. So what we're doing now is we're going to move on into vesicular transport, which is similar to active transport with the sodium-potassium pump, in that we're going to use energy to move something from an area where there's less of it to the area where there's more of it. Okay. Vesicular transport requires energy, as did the active transport with the potassium pump. This is the energy source. And there's 2 major kinds, and you can see in the roots of these words, the roots will help you, okay? Osis can be an abnormal condition or a process. In this case, it is not abnormal at all. These are normal processes. So process is what the meaning is. Cyto is for cell, okay? And exo means for out of the cell, and endo means for within the cell. Okay, so in this case, we're moving something out of the cell, a process by which something is moved out of the cell. And for endocytosis is a process by which something is moved into the cell. Simple as that. If you know your roots and you see that as a key word in a question, endocytosis, then you immediately want to start thinking endocytosis. It's going into the cell, 1. It's a vesicular transport, which is active. So now I know even a little more about it, okay? All right, so here we have a picture. Actually, these images are Electron microscope images, okay? And this is an actual cell right here, okay? All the dark part are the inside of a cell. And all of these little particles here were particles that were once held within this cell, okay? And here we have a bubble, and that bubble is a vesicle. Now what has happened here is that this vesicle, they call it a secretory vesicle, has gathered up all sorts of items that may be actually waste products. They could be other things, and they may not be a waste product. But either way, what is needed is this product, this item, needs to be shipped out of the cell. Okay? Now, these vesicles are actually made of the same components, phospholipid bilayer, okay? And there's proteins in this phospholipid bilayer. And then here on the plasma membrane, this is the outer boundary, right? It's also made out of the same material. Now, this is an active process, and I always think of this almost like a truck bringing produce to Wegmans or something, right? You have a docking area, a docking station. And at that dock, you might see that truck back up, right? And so it's right there at the dock. The truck's going to open up. The building, the door to Wegmans is going to open up, and there's going to be a union, right? And that's exactly what happens here. And there's going to be a secretion that occurs. So whatever it is that's held within that bubble, okay, that vesicle, is going to move out of the cell. Now this does require energy. Think of that truck, right? That truck is carrying a heavy load, right? And it's actually backing up. It's using gas, right? It's using energy to back up and to make that connection. Somebody's got to open up those doors, right? That's going to use some energy. This is an active process, okay? Now let's move to the opposite, an endocytosis, okay? Something's moving to the inside of a cell, endo. So here we have, again, some electron microscope pictures, okay? And they're showing you what is outside the cell, extracellular versus intracellular, okay? And down here in our drawing, it's trying to mimic what we see above, extracellular, intracellular, okay? Now in this particular case, a particular item, this yellow dot here, okay, is binding to a receptor and being all kind of gathered up here as the membrane folds in on that cell. This is again a phospholipid bilayer, okay, and it's folding in. This is not something that happens naturally, okay? This is going to require energy. There's a lot of energy on the inside of the cell as certain proteins are laid down all the way around this bubble that's forming, this vesicle that's forming, okay? And ultimately, it buds off and you have a separate bubble, okay? Now a cell wouldn't, in its right mind, right? It's not really thinking, but a cell wouldn't have a normal function that would bring in a waste product, right? The likelihood is that this cell is in need of this particular item, right? Whatever is binding to those receptors might be a valuable commodity that's going to be brought into the cell for the cell's use. Now, an ironic example of this would be actually cholesterol. There are cells like these cells that are in the blood vessels that will actively bind cholesterol and bring cholesterol into the cell, as you see here, with this endocytosis process going on. Now, cholesterol is not a bad thing. It's actually a natural thing to have in our diet, and it's necessary for normal function. Just the fact is that we have too many of these cholesterols in our diet, okay? So this would be a receptor-mediated, receptors are involved, right? They bind to the item that the cell needs to bring in, okay? And then endocytosis occurs. Again, needs energy. It is an active process, okay? All right, can you believe it? We're actually at the end of our processes for moving things into and out of the cell. And we will move on to some of the other functions of proteins in the membrane and dive into this cell, talk about some of the compartments that are found inside the cell itself.